So there was a full moon this week, and it was incredibly intense. And that's because this lunation activated an incredibly rare long-term blueprint of the era we are currently in, a 6-year-long outer planetary minor triangle. Now, I've talked about this minor triangle before, but just to refresh your brain, the wings are Pluto in Aquarius and Uranus in Gemini, with Pluto being in retrograde right now. Pluto in Aquarius representing the collective evolution we are in the midst of in retrograde, clarifying why that needs to happen. Uranus, of course, represents shock disruption. And in Gemini, it takes on a volatile, dynamic air, with both planets sextiling Neptune, which is also in retrograde right now, in Aries. Neptune in Aries is all about visionary pioneering, and when in retrograde, it's all about clarity. In this case, right now, clarifying the egoic illusions that are ruling our society and lives. And this 6-year-long minor triangle is currently nestled into a 3-month-long grand cradle, because Pluto in Aquarius is opposing Jupiter in Leo. Again, I've talked about this transit, but just for a refresher, Jupiter in Leo asks us if we are expanding our fire. Pluto in Aquarius asks if that is for the greater good, for collective evolution, and exposes if it's not. Now, the full moon that was this week, which peaked on July 29th, was conjunct Pluto in Aquarius, illuminating the status of the Plutonian rebirth, which we are currently facing. On top of the moon being conjunct Pluto, the sun is still conjunct Jupiter right now, further illuminating not just Jupiter, but the entire 3-month-long grand cradle, essentially demanding our vitality to be applied to the revelations and illuminations that we have had really since Mercury retrograde. Now, there was a lot of breaking news this week. Just like I warned, just like I predicted, this lunation served as a massive climax in the fight between individualism and collectivism, as it was essentially designed to rip back the curtain on systemic corruption, abusers, shadowy underbelly of international alliances, and overall the harms of late-stage capitalism. Let's quickly run down all of the news that I've followed this week, and how they all served as unyielding literal manifestations of the solar-lunar activation of the Jupiter-Pluto grand cradle that we've talked about. An LA Superior Court judge ruled that David will stand trial for the murder of Celeste Hernandez. Additionally, the BBC released a documentary exposing Jared Leto's sexual misconduct towards minors. These mark karmic manifestations of Pluto exposing and uncovering predatory power dynamics within celebrity culture within the Epstein class. On the 28th, U.S. Federal Reserve voted to keep interest rates high on a vote of 9-3, protecting speculative capital, war interests in the Middle East, and AI investments over the working class. Quite literally a Plutonian exposure of the systemic imbalances within our society, within our economic system. On July 27th, the U.S. walked out of the UN, essentially because France was calling out our government's bullshit. Once again, Plutonian exposure of the fallacy that alliance and diplomacy between the U.S. and global Western power is based upon. There were a few notable protests this week. On July 30th, British police arrested dozens of pro-Palestine protesters. This protest and the arrests occurred the same day as the UK Supreme Court granting permission to Palestine Action to appeal the government's terrorism prescription designation. Over 500 public defense staff across Brooklyn, Harlem, New York City, and Detroit are on strike for a livable wage and proper health care. This strike started actually before the full moon cycle with 230 workers, and it expanded on July 27th during the full moon cycle with 300 workers joining the strike. From the 28th to the 29th, there were protests in Venezuela against the U.S.-Israeli military influence in South America. All of these protests, of course, embody Aquarian energy demanding humanitarian fairness and equality. We, of course, saw more U.S. authoritarianism. On July 27th, the temporary protection status of 300,000 Haitians in America expired. Then, over the next 2 days, the Trump administration implemented a new rule which allows hundreds of thousands of pending asylum applications to be routed straight into deportation proceedings without a first hearing or interview. Then, on the 30th, the Trump administration convened the Alien Terrorist Removal Court for the first time since its creation in 1996 to pursue the deportation of alleged non-citizen terrorists, which, given the current definition of a terrorist by the U.S. government, they're likely not terrorists. The U.S. Senate voted Jay Clayton as the new director of intelligence, despite having no background in intelligence. Senator Rand Paul's years-long crusade against Dr. Fauci hit ahead as Dr. Fauci was subpoenaed to appear before the Senate, Homeland Security, and the Government Affairs Committee, where he faced unfactual, conspiratorial questions from various Republican officials and exercised his Fifth Amendment right over 100 times. There was also an announcement from Trump about the creation of his Board of Peace, which is essentially the U.S. trying to create their own UN instead of following the guidelines of the UN. And it is through this Board of Peace that Trump announced an agreement to fully disarm Hamas and other Gaza armed factions, and placed the ultimate authority of Gaza's transition under a U.S.-appointed high representative and a Palestinian government instead of Palestinian governance, the Palestinians themselves. All of this, of course, once again exemplifies the Leo-Aquarius opposition between patriarchal political figures wanting to expand their own egoic fire and Aquarian collective survival, collective human rights being attacked. On the evening of July 26th, a shootout erupted in a Seattle food festival, resulting in the loss of 2 innocent lives, Carlos Sanchez Villaba and Ashley Whitehead, as well as the injuring of 4 others. This, of course, is not the only example of violence from this past week. The Iran war continues and is becoming increasingly connected to the Russia-Ukraine war. That's because Ukraine executed a long-range drone strike against Iranian ship vessels. This, of course, influenced Trump's meeting with Netanyahu, which which was their first in-person meeting since the start of the Iran war, and Trump also met with Zelensky, both meetings being obvious attempts by Washington for strategic alliance on priorities in authoritarian fascist military priorities in not just the Middle East, but in Eurasia. Furthermore, wildfires still persist in Western North America as well as Europe, and there was a 7.1 magnitude earthquake in Japan. Disaster response networks in all regions are being stretched to their limits, including the American Red Cross, which declared a national blood supply crisis for the second time in its 150-year history. Like I said earlier, Uranus governs shock, disruption, sudden change, unexpected events. Uranus, of course, was activated by this full moon through its trine to Pluto as a part of the 6-year-long minor triangle and that 3-month-long grand cradle, which I talked about earlier, which is why all of these natural disasters are screaming Uranus shock and disruption. Furthermore, Mars, the planet of war, courage, vitality, and thus blood, emergency response, was also activated the same day because alongside Uranus, Mars is also still in Gemini. When we look at the sheer scale of crises that erupted and intensified during this full moon, we are not just looking at a string of bad news. We are witnessing the undeniable limitations of late-stage capitalism. This system built on endless extraction, imperial dominance, and the sacrifice of collective livelihood for the sake of profit for a select few continues to reach its breaking point. And that is what the aforementioned 6-year-long outer planetary minor triangle is all about. So this mass radicalization due to the harsh realities of today is not going away anytime soon, and in fact will be intensified not just over the next 6 years, but also over the next month, because we have now entered eclipse season. Over the next couple weeks, as the moon moves through the signs, we will continue to be shook into radicalization, which, remember that the revolution will not be televised because it happens within. So this radicalization will shake us into internal review and then external action, all leading up to our next collective rebirth checkpoint, the Leo eclipse on August 12th. If you'd like to learn more about the news that I mentioned in this video, the astrological transits I mentioned in this video, and what these astrological transits mean for your sign, you can check out my blog, link in bio. Sending you immense love and strength as we navigate this collective rebirth.